I always recommend like our students inside CSPA to record themselves, not just do it in front of the mirror, record yourself like sitting in front of your webcam and having someone ask you these interview questions and watch your body language, because when you're nervous, your brain will freeze up and won't realize that you're clicking your pen every 5 seconds, and it's really distracting for the interview panel. But that being said, knowing your interview format is kind of one of the first things you should really strive to do when preparing for your CRNA interview. If you don't know your CRNA school interview style, I encourage you to try to figure out that first and foremost. Now, the best way to do that is to connect with current students, which again, CRNA School Prep Academy can connect you with a current student from your dream school. That is one of the things that we are very good at doing inside the academy. I'm Jenny Finnell, CRNA and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. I have always had a passion for helping those who aspire to become a CRNA. A couple of years ago, I started mentoring a handful of prospective students. Fast forward to today, and I have a successful mentoring program that has impacted hundreds of aspiring and now current nurse anesthesia students. What I enjoy the most in my business is connecting with you, the future CRNA. I love learning and growing with you. The road to CRNA is full of unique challenges, and no two journeys are the same. But every journey has a learning opportunity. I'm here to share what I have learned over the years from not just my students, but CRNA community leaders, program faculty, and from my time as a practicing CRNA. This will be your one-stop shop to get the mentoring you need to not only guide you into this career path, but support you all the way through to graduation day. So if you're a nursing student who's exploring the possibility, an ICU nurse actively pursuing CRNA, or a current nurse anesthesia student, you're in the right place. Tune in for inspiration and actionable takeaways that will help you from start to finish. Let's get started. So we are in CRNA interview season as we speak. So you may be wondering, do I need a mock interview? And in this episode, we're going to get into what I think you should kind of make that decision as far as whether you actually need to get a mock interview prior to your real interview. So let's go ahead and get into the show. Hello, and welcome to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Finnell, CRNA, and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. So one of the most shouted out services that CSPA had routinely offered were mock interviews. That being said, kind of a new fun announcement is that we have officially launched Nurses Teach Nurses. Nurses Teach Nurses is a platform where you can go book a mock interview, resume, personal statement edit, and a whole lot more. We built this website, custom built this website, because we wanted to be able to serve you. We wanted to be able to provide more service providers and more help around this area. Because like I said, especially mock interviews is definitely, and I mean, really all the services are highly, highly sought out after and praised from the mountaintops, if I'm being perfectly honest. So we wanted a way to be able to provide more of them. And I want to say it was last year that we had to turn down about 10 people a week because we just simply did not have the availability. So my hope was that by this busy interview season that you're going to be able to find a mock interview. However, I do know that it's still, if you're thinking you need a mock interview, I would definitely look ahead of time, especially if your schedule is really busy, because I do know they're booking up. But that being said, I wanted to discuss on this episode whether or not you actually need to pay for a mock interview, whether you should be doing that. So let's go ahead and get into it and kind of my thoughts around it. Now, I guess I should preference this with, of course, I feel mock interviews are a great way to go. However, I don't always agree that you need to pay for one. So I kind of want to get into what are your alternatives if you decide not to do a mock interview, and kind of how you can kind of gauge. I've had a lot of my students ask me, well, how do I know how many I need? I mean, I've had students who book 4 or 5 mock interviews, but I do not think everyone needs 4 or 5 mock interviews. So that's why I wanted to make sure I brought this topic to your attention. All right. So first, when do you need it? You know, I think as far as time frame goes, I think you should definitely, if you think you will need a mock interview, I would plan to book one prior to your anticipated real interview. Meaning, a mistake I see a lot of candidates make is they wait till they get asked to interview to start looking for a mock interview. And by then it could be too late, meaning there's not going to be any availability. I also think there are some schools who give very little notice. And so you might be thinking, oh, I didn't get asked to interview, maybe next year. And then they're like, can you come tomorrow? And you're like, I just assumed I wasn't getting one, right? So don't make that mistake. If you apply to CRNA school, plan on interviewing. Practice interviewing. You should be practicing your interview skills prior to even applying to CRNA school. You shouldn't wait till after you apply to CRNA school to really get serious about preparing for the interview. So please know that that's my 100% heartfelt recommendation is prepare for the interview. at the same time you're actively applying to CRNA school, okay? But that being said, obviously we all have different experiences. Me, myself, I interviewed for the medical ICU, but I knew that staff really well. I had worked there as a nurse's aide. I wouldn't say prior to CRNA school, I had truly experienced that type of interview. Like I had never been through a grueling interview before. And so was I weak on interview skills? I sure was. I practiced with my parents. This was back in circa 2011, I would say. So at the time, there was no CRNA School Prep Academy, and I knew one current student in the program I wanted to attend, but I equally remember thinking at the time, going to my very first interview, I was just like, oh, I got this. I'll just do my best on my own. I'll be fine. I'll practice with some coworkers who are also going to CRNA school. I'll practice with my parents, my sister, anyone who will listen to me, I'll practice. I'll practice in front of myself in the mirror, which I did, but I bombed my first interview. Like I didn't do so well. And then I actually then reached out to the friend I knew who was in the program, and I asked her all kinds of questions. And she gave me a great study guide. She gave me some great tips, and I took them all to heart and went 100% in on the tips she gave me. And I was able to rock my second interview. Now, I continued to do practice interviews, and I actually had my parents with this practice list of questions I had drill me, along with, I spoke to Amy, Alyssa, and Kendra, calling you out. You're my girls. Donna was there too, but Donna got in a couple years later. But that being said, 3 of my other girlfriends, we were all applying to the same school. So we were each other's competition, yet we were friends, right? So we're like, let's help each other. So we didn't hold back. We shared everything we found out. The tips I got on the coming up interview, I gave to them. We all practiced together. And guess what? All 3 of us got in. So that being said, the power in sharing with your coworkers that are equally pursuing CRNA, the community support is huge, you guys. But I think that was really what did it for me, right? I mean, my first attempt at a real interview, and I also gave me a lot of insight on that first interview that, wow, I was way underprepared. Like I was not prepared for that interview like I thought I was, because I didn't know what to expect. Going into the second one, I knew more of what to expect. Plus, I knew what kind of style I was walking into, so I could better prepare. So I think that's my first recommendation. Do you know your school's interview style? Because they're all different. And here's the other thing is they can always change. So it's like it may have been one style this year, and they might have got a new program director or brought in a new interview panel, and now they're going to change it up. So that does happen pretty routinely. And I also know they know that people talk, and so much so that they even change it up from day to day, from the interview day to day, even from interview to interview in the same day. They know people talk. So they know the questions are going to be shared. Obviously, they don't like when that happens, but they know human nature. You're probably going to tell someone. So they have a giant bank of questions. Don't get me wrong. They tend to have their favorites, right? They tend to have ones they tend to like to ask every single time. But that being said, don't focus so much on the actual questions as much as practicing the style and assessing how you're responding to that style, right? Catching whether you're getting defensive, or if you're stumbling over your words, or saying a lot, or looking at the ground, or clicking your pen, or rocking back and forth and sucking your thumb. Pay attention to those things. Because believe it or not, you may not even notice you're doing it. So I always recommend our students inside CSPA to record themselves, not just do it in front of the mirror, record yourself, sitting in front of your webcam and having someone ask you these interview questions, and watch your body language, because when you're nervous, your brain will freeze up and your nerves will get the best of you, and you won't realize that you're, clicking your pen every 5 seconds, and it's really distracting for the interview panel. But that being said, knowing your interview format is kind of one of the first things you should really strive to do when preparing for the for your CRNA interview. If you don't know your CRNA school interview style, I encourage you to try to figure out that first and foremost. Now, the best way to do that is to connect with current students, which again, CRNA School Prep Academy can connect you with a current student from your dream school. That is one of the things that we are very good at doing inside the academy. You just simply have to let us know, and we can make sure that happens. So find out your interview format. Next thing is to understand your school's mission statement. I know that sounds kind of really? Yeah, you should understand who is on the panel, right? What are they known for? Are they really active in the ANA? Have they written papers on certain things? Are they published? I mean, yeah, Google stock your program faculty because more than likely they're going to be on the interview panel, and you should really know who they are and know what they stand for and what's important to them. There are some program faculty who have done PhD papers on mental wellness, right? And so that's an important aspect of who they are, and probably a good core mission of what the program strives to do for their students is to educate them while also incorporating making sure mental wellness is a priority. So not that you have to speak to that but you never know. It could come up in some other way in your interview. And if you can speak to that and what it means to you, it's going to resonate with that program faculty. And they're like, wow, they're on the same page as me, right? And I'm not saying lie, don't do that, because they can read right through that. So if you don't agree with what they stand for, then try to find something else you do agree with their mission statement or that the program faculty is known for. So I think that's an important aspect too. And then also, do you think you can speak to your accomplishments? I know this sounds kind of like, well, with my resume, Jenny. Well, but can you speak to them? I mean, you'd be surprised at how many people are kind of too shy or too like, I'm being modest. Don't be modest. This is your time to sell yourself, but you have to be able to speak eloquently and clearly, concisely, briefly to the point. You can't have this long drawn out 10-minute synopsis to tell them one brief thing. Like you're going to lose them. Think of like, social media. It's like squirrel. Like get to the point and hit the highlights and capture their attention, right? It's almost kind of like a sales pitch, almost like where you have to get right into the point and capture someone's attention. Kind of like how I do these hooks for the YouTube channels. I have to introduce the topic because I want you to keep watching. But if I just say, "Hey, my name is Jenny," blah blah blah, I'm gonna lose you. You're gonna be like, "Squirrel, what's next?" So it's kind of the same thing when you're speaking to your accomplishments. You want to make sure you're doing it in a way that can capture their attention and keep them engaged. Can you speak to your weaknesses? This is huge, and this is actually something that I was definitely caught off guard in my very first interview because it had to do with an issue I had with a coworker, and I had not thought of that. And so I struggled trying to come up with an idea, and I ended up burying myself into a hole that I couldn't get myself out of that just looked bad, even though it wasn't actually bad, but I just didn't know how to eloquently present it, right? I hadn't thought about that. So what would others say about you? That's a weakness. They can not just say, what's your weakness? And say, what would your coworker say they don't like about you? Or what would your manager say you need to work on and if you came for your review and they said you actually had to work on X, Y, and Z, what would that be? That could be how they ask, what is your weakness? So be prepared for them to kind of spin that in different ways. Your CCRN, I want to mention that because that's going to give you a good indication of your ICU knowledge base. If you haven't had time to take your CCRN, or maybe you didn't pass your CCRN, or maybe you had to take it 2 or 3 times, ask yourself, how confident do you feel about them grilling you with pathophysiology, pharmacology questions? And the beauty of this is actually my favorite personal interview style. I actually don't mind them both these days. But back then when I interviewed, I would say, give me a pathophys pharm question any day versus a personal question, because I had clearly worked more on that aspect of who I was than my own personal development at that point. I mean, how old was I? I was in my mid-20s. I mean, I didn't know who I was. I was just Jenny. I was just Jenny from the block, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I just felt like I've grown so much since then that I can more eloquently explain who I am to someone than I could have when I was in my mid-20s. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. But I didn't dedicate tons of time to thinking about who I was as a person. So it kind of led me into this path of not really being able to clearly speak to that in the interview. So that's something to think about. But again, being asked pathophys and pharm questions equally makes some people cringe. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't want those types of questions. I will flop on my face if I get those. So if you know that about yourself, you do need to practice that. And sometimes people just don't know what they need. And so that's where I'm getting into, do you need a mock interview? I would love to say you might know yourself, but I equally also know just from my own personal experience that sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so the mock interview, what's great about a mock interview and a true mock interview from someone who has experienced a CRNA interview before, from someone who has the knowledge base that you need to know, is that they can really pinpoint your weaknesses like that. Now, I had my parents do mock interviews. They had no clue what they were asking me. They're like, sure, Jenny, that's amazing. Wow, you blew my mind. It's like, thanks, Mom. But, having someone who has an understanding clinically and emotionally about what you're going to be up against can really give you that critical feedback that's actually going to help you versus just like, bravo, and you do need that. You do need some critical feedback to be able to pinpoint your weaknesses and where you can improve. So again, a lot of it just depends on what you think you need, but I also equally encourage you to be aware that you may not know what you need. I think a mock interview is never going to do you wrong, ever. It's only going to help you. Now, do you need more than one? Again, I suggest doing one. And if you need another one, book another one. But I suggest trying one, maybe I would say, if you're really nervous about it. I mean, if you're you get hives and you just break out and you sweat and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to freak out. I'm going to have a panic attack. Book one 2 months prior to your anticipated interview, 2 months. This will get your feet wet. And then you can decide, well, how did that go? And then from there you can say, okay, I'm going to do one. I actually felt pretty good. I did better than I expected. So now I'm going to just plan on doing one more, maybe 2 weeks before my actual interview or anticipated interview. Remember, anticipated, because if you don't get a heads up and now you have a week or a 4-day notice, you might not find anything. So I would book it when you anticipate having your interview and give yourself 2 weeks. The reason why I think you need to give yourself time is because you have to review that replay and you have to review the critiques and practice what they told you to practice. So that's kind of why I think it's important to give yourself at least 2 weeks prior to your real day. Now, I know I have had students who literally want one like the week of their actual interview. I've also had students do it the day before. I think that that's like a lot of pressure to do a mock interview right before the day before. I think you need at least a week to process an actual mock interview. So that's my recommendation, is to give yourself at least a week, but ideally 2 weeks. So that's kind of my gauge. Now, if you did one and you're worried about it 2 months out, and you totally bombed it, you're like, wow, that was embarrassing. Like, that was so bad. Well, then do another one a month later, right? Work on things to improve, practice in the mirror, record yourself, work on the things they critiqued you on, and then do one another month out. And then from there, do the same thing. Assess it. How'd it go? Way better. I feel so much better now. Well, cool. Well, now you may or may not need a third one, right? If you feel good, cool, you're good. But you could also be like, wow, but I am still really nervous. Maybe just one more will like take the edge off. And so then you do one more, right? So that's kind of how I would gauge how much you would need. Now, had I had the option to do a mock interview back in the day, I would have probably done at least 3 in my own personal, because I know that would have made me feel better and would have made me feel more confident. And I bet you if I had done that, I would have probably gotten into my first interview, no problem. Because I didn't like totally bomb it. I shouldn't say I totally bombed it. There are some things I did well. Like I did the pathophysiology pharmacology questions really well, but I did not answer the personal questions very well. So that would have really pointed out that weakness, and I would have been able to work on it. Would have one mock interview been enough? Maybe. I might have been, but how much I wanted to become a CRNA, knowing how I am, and I'm totally type A, I would have probably done at least 2 mock interviews. So I'm not saying you need to do that. You don't have to do any. There are some candidates who literally just practice with their coworker, their friend, their significant other, and that's all they need. Or they record themselves in the mirror. I did a mock interview with a student, and I told her to practice my critiques and my edits in front of the mirror prior to her big day, and she did. And that's all she had to do. And she rocked it. She got in. And she said, I appreciate you telling me to record myself, because that really was also a good way to practice after the fact, to make sure I was making the improvements you suggested. So again, I think it's just up to you to kind of gauge where you're at. You can do a lot just on your own. Connect in our community, inside the CRNA School Prep Academy community. Pick a partner, a mock interview partner. Why not? I mean, I know both of you are like, well, I don't know what I'm walking into, Jenny, but you'd be surprised at how much you actually do know. Like if you had the interview list that we have over like 400 interview practice questions inside of CRNA School Prep Academy. Like you can mock interview for 18 hours straight if you wanted to, but pick like a bank of 15 questions and make sure you both have different questions and practice with each other. I mean, you might as well use the community that's here to support you. Again, you don't have to pay for a mock interview, but I do think that it's a good way to practice in front of a stranger. But equally, you can find a stranger in the community and meet on Zoom and practice on Zoom. I mean, why not? I know I sure as heck would have taken advantage of that myself as well. Like I probably would have done like 20 mock interviews with a stranger if I had a Facebook community that connected me with those people. So those are my recommendations. Again, Nurses Teach Nurses is available. You can go ahead and book your mock interview. The site is open. You can also be a service provider. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I think I could help a nursing student land an ICU position and prepare for that interview, become a service provider. You can apply to become a service provider. It's a really cool platform. I don't know if you're familiar with like what Upwork is. It's like a freelancer marketplace. So, essentially you're there to support the community through mentorship, by providing a service. So I think it's really fun to see students who advance through CSPA who go on to provide mock interviews, because that's essentially what we did inside CSPA. I had students that I knew would be great mock interviewers based on my experience with them, based on what I knew about them, and they went on to rock it. And so have faith in that. That's a really cool aspect that you can do, and it's a really flexible way to give back and also earn cash in school. And it gets back to the community. So like, again, we have people shout people out from the mountaintops who do mock interviews for them, because it makes a huge impact in their ability to successfully interview. And remember, the application is getting the interview. Passing the interview is getting acceptance. So I hope you guys found this episode helpful. I'm rooting for you. You got this. Come on, let's do it. Be sure to share your win with me. I always love celebrating with you. And if you don't get in, share that with me too, because I equally love to give you that big virtual hug and keep your chin up and keep you going, because the yes is right around the corner. So, all right, till next time. Bye, you guys. Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.